I had you all know that I have a couple of groups I work with online, and I had come across this 14-minute conversation between Father Michael Keating and Ken Wilber, in which they were discussing the importance of centering prayer or contemplative prayer, and how scientifically we can measure the effects of those type of practices. And that, like last week, I talked about the stages that we all go through as humans and as community. They have found in the research that those that do some type of practice that's similar to those, and whether you're calling it centering prayer or contemplative or sitting with spirit or mindfulness, or, pick your word. But as you go through that, they have found that those that choose to do that at least once a day, if not twice, ramp up their ability to go through those stages. So they found that you could actually go 2 stages in 4 years, which is almost unheard of for humans to get to different parts of their life for that kind of awareness in that short of time, at least through the research over the millennia. So I posted this with a little comment that if they needed to replace centering prayer or contemplative prayer with another word, and I listed a few others like I just did now that are really similar in practice, that they could do that to understand what they were being said in that 14 minutes. I received a comment back that the whole thing could not be grasped because that person did not believe in God. So it was a non-point that I was making. And online, it is way too hard to get into those conversations when you're writing in little comments. But it brought me to, well, how do we define God? What is that definition of God? Because was that lovely lady and I working on the same definition, especially since she was in a group that I put all kinds of stuff in all the time, right? And this is the conversation. So, how do we define God? In just the Aramaic, the Indian, the Persian traditions, just those, you can find over 100 names of God each in those traditions, each. Now imagine that, and I'm going to share some of those with you. I'm not going to share all of them. I'm going to share some of them because depending on what word you're using for that name shows a little bit about what definition you're using at that time. Right? And that just in the Bible, there was over 100. So if you're looking at just the Judeo-Christian text, there's over 100. And I don't know that we often think about that either when we're going through. And then we come to other notions that we all understand, that it's in the principles that we hold, that we work with the God of our understanding, right? So the God of our understanding also works into that definition. There's a quote I found from Paul Tillich, who's a German philosopher and theologian, and he lived from 1886 to 1965. And he said, "I hope for the day when everyone can speak again of God without embarrassment." And again, what kind of word are we using for God that the conversation gets muddled, and some people, and we know them, and sometimes we have been them, where the word God doesn't fit where we are on our path at the time, and we switch it to something else, right? In the group that's been meeting on Tuesdays, we talked just recently about the idea of the I amness of God, and that we are that I am, that we are extensions of that, we are that. And that part of the practice of getting there or recognizing that or being empowered is to say, I am, place a word there, that I am. And if we take some of these words these other names of God and put in there. They become characteristics for us to recognize and to follow universally. So I'm going to go through just a few. And these ones that I'm going to go through are all found in the Judeo-Christian text, the Bible. These are all pulled from there. Advocate. I am advocate. Almighty. Amen. Anointed one. Carpenter. Comforter. Faithfulness and witness. Friend of sinners. Guide. Life. Light of the world. Master. Mediator. Morning star. Physician. Priest. Peace. Refuge. Rock. Sacrifice. Servant. Teacher. Way. Wonderful counselor. And if those are the names, right? What is it that sometimes we don't believe in? Or somebody says to us, well, I can't have that conversation with you because I don't even believe in God. Do you believe that you have the power to bring peace and sacrifice and be a way and a counselor and a refuge for each other? And that is what God is. The Tao says, the Tao is a pathway, right? The Tao is a road or a pathway. It's this understanding that the ultimate reality, the way of the universe is the order of life. The Tao, again, is another name for God. It's that name that cannot be named. Again, that's an Eastern tradition, but it's the same. I know I've talked before about some of our great scientists like Stephen Hawking, who said he was an atheist. And yet you read his writings and he totally believed in an expanding, recognizable, growing universe. So did he not believe in God, or did he not believe in a definition of God that did not suit him and his understanding of the universe? In the Kabbalistic adage, the universe exists because God wished to behold God. The universe wished to understand itself. And then became life, because that was a way to understand. I don't know that we can really separate out the philosophical, the spiritual, and the scientific, when we talk about these. And to get to the definition that each of us are dealing with in these conversations, I think brings out a whole lot more in the area of compassion. And I know I've told you also before, and it's a story I feel like repeating again, that one of the first classes I was asked to go to that was not church-centered, to a group of people to teach healing or to talk about healing. And I was booked for 6 weeks in a row to come and talk to this group about healing and how to grow in that and how to meditate with that and how to, understand that for themselves. And I almost did not get to go back for the second class because my first couple of words were prayer and God. And they went, that's not what we're here for. So we took a break. I went and took a breath and said, what's going on? And I realized that they're working with a different definition. And we took the time that first class to talk about what their definition was and why they didn't feel that saying those words was why they were there in terms of healing. And here each of them shared an experience from a dogmatic tradition that they felt hurt by in some way, where they were told they weren't worthy or they weren't good enough, or something hurtful in that process of trying to understand God from a building or a group of people that said, well, you have to do it a certain way or you're not worthy. All of them had some version of that. So I said, what word would you like? What word are we working with? And they said, well, spirit is where everything is. I said, then we're going to use that. And you're going to change the word prayer to healing. We're going to use just the word healing for prayer. And then we got to talk about, for me, I don't care. Pick a word. It's, again, it's the way that we are understanding our life and our relationship with everything in the moment. And if whatever words we're choosing for that, I think we need to honor that, not just for ourselves, but for each other, for everyone. Those same people, now that was, oh goodness, we got talking, it was almost like 9 years ago, that group of people first sat with me, and several of them are still in my orbit today. And they laugh about that now, because through those times, and especially because I'll use them interchangeably, they don't get so hurt or hung up anymore when other people use different words. Does that make sense? So they're able to have that conversation. And I wonder sometimes if all of our life, so sometimes I think it's easier in spiritual context to say, well, what's your definition? Than when we're having arguments or disagreements about other things in life, right? It's like, what is the definition? How are we defining where we're coming from first? Let's lay that as a base before the rest of us start even talking. Deepak Chopra actually wrote, there's just a couple sentences I'm going to share, but he wrote an article in Science Direct in March 2014. And he was asked to talk about this because he was a scientist first, right? Spiritual director second, and now it's probably vice versa. But he had a grounding in science. And he says the paradox that the vendetta rejects materialism as unsound, while at the same time allowing any model to be valid on its own limited terms, since all models are created in consciousness. All models, including religious and philosophical, are equal in this respect. Science isn't privileged, but neither is Buddhism or Theosophy or anything. Vendetta can live with the paradox that all systems of thought are viable and inadequate at the same time. The only privileged thing is consciousness itself. The only privileged thing is you and your outlook and how you choose to work with that. However you're coming at it at this time is perfect for you. The flip of that is to recognize it's also perfect for somebody else. Recently, with staying at home more, I've signed up for more magazines than I think I have in my entire life to help us have information and to have conversations with my kids. And a science magazine has been one of them. And with that comes a subscription to pop in on real scientists online that are doing Zooms now and having conversations that as a subscriber you can listen to. And there was a physics one my son and I were listening to. And the idea of consciousness of the universe was part of the discussion in the physics panel. And it was interesting and beautiful that these scientists, even though they were from one end of the dial to the other on whether consciousness was part of their study, had enough respect for each other to let each other talk and say, I can see that point of view of yours. I'm going to tell you about mine now. So there was no denying that there could be a consciousness in the realm of physics and science, even if they didn't quite know how to test that. I think that's what Deepak Chopra is getting in his article too, is you don't need to say it has to be one or the other. You can find ways in yourself to recognize that it's a blend of our own awareness and our own consciousness that brings us to all these conclusions. Thomas Keating also says that there are two books of Revelation. He says there's the Bible and there's nature. He said you have the inspired text, but you also have the natural world. And that those truths are in both. Those truths are in both. So, how do we define God? You might just say that it's the ultimate reality. And that ultimate reality is up to you. How would you like to witness and experience and share that ultimate reality, not just with yourself, but with each other? Alan Watts says, through our eyes, the universe is perceiving itself. Through our ears, the universe is listening to its harmonies. We are the witness through which the universe becomes conscious of its glory, of its magnificence. The universe becomes conscious of its glory through us. And we are that universe. Maybe just one last thought from Antonio Porcia, who's an Italian poet. He says, we become aware of the void as we feel it, as we're willing to feel it. So anytime there's that, well, I don't believe moment with anything, how are we feeling that void of that nothingness with us now? Are we willing to sit with it, to contemplate with it? For I hope for the day when everyone can speak again of God without embarrassment. Thank you.